Yeah? You got there? You're there. I'm just going to read one verse, verse 8. He has showed you, O man, what is good. Hands up those he's talking to. Didn't say, O man, as in man. He meant mankind. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, for years, and I don't know why, for years I actually thought this said to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. But when I looked at it today, I looked at it again, and I went back to the original language, and the original language clearly says, God does not ask you to act justly, love mercy, and walk before God. He asks you to walk with God. Now listen to this again. What does the Lord require of you? He wants you to act justly and love mercy and walk humbly with your God. He wants to walk with you. What an incredible statement. See, a lot of people don't mind the walking before God because he's just watching their walk. But the moment I get into a walk with, see, Brian today is going to move from someone that has had a relationship from afar off to walking with a wife. And boy, he will find out, and if I had time to tell him, he will find out that things will change. He will find out the nitty-gritty issues that they have not yet discussed. Because Amos 3 and verse 3 says, can two walk together lest they be agreed? My wife and I actually only courted for 3 months before we married, and found out that there was so much that we didn't agree on. And you know this, that in any marriage there is a wrestle for supremacy. Everybody's looking at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. We just floated into the thing together. It worked together. No, there's a wrestle for supremacy. And I came in the marriage with knowing that men were in charge. And she came in the marriage totally equally knowing that they weren't. And it took us years of wrestling until eventually God took over. Now there's some agreement. Yes, ma'am. I'm just joking. But to walk together is going to be something intense, and so many people don't want to do it. But God did not require you to be happy. He can make you happy. He didn't require you to be prosperous. He can make you prosperous. He required you to walk with him. Do you know how few people walk with God? Ever since the creation of mankind, it's always been the same. Genesis 3 and verse 8, they heard the sound of God walking in the garden. Why was he walking in the garden? Because he was walking in his creation to have a walk with those he created. And after the fall, it's incredible. You'll spot through the Old Testament finding God looking for people to walk with. You get to Genesis 5 and verse 24, and it says there was a man called Enoch. And Enoch walked with God. And then it says in the original version, and he was not, for God took him. In other words, he so walked with God that God so loved the relationship that God could not stand not continually walking with him. What an awesome statement. It says in Genesis 6:9, there was another man called Noah who walked with God. And he so walked with God that God kept him when he judged all of mankind that were there in those days. And you say, well, was there anybody else that walked with God? Yes, there was. We can find in Exodus 33 and verse 14 where Moses is crying out to God, who's going to walk with me? Who's going to go with me? God says, my presence will go with you. In other words, for 40 years I will walk with you through the wilderness. You and I walking together. It says in the previous few verses that God talked with Moses as a man talks with his friend face to face. Abraham managed to do it. For it says in Isaiah 41 and verse 8 that Abraham, my friend. Woo! How about that? Actually being called a friend of God by God, not by some song they wrote. And it tells us in Proverbs 18:24 that there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. It's speaking about God. So when God becomes your friend, you walk with God. What an awesome truth. But then you move into the New Testament and it takes on a totally different realm, because the reason that Jesus was called Emmanuel, God with us, is that God wanted to put a man, his son, with us so that God could walk with man. God with us. I love it. I could preach for hours on Jesus preaching on the kingdom of heaven is right here. It's right at hand. Here I am, a manifestation of the rule and the purposes and the life of God right here. I want to walk with you. And those disciples for 3.5 years had the privilege, get this, 12 disciples. Look where they came from. Fishermen, tax collectors, regular people who walked with God for 3.5 years. Till they hit what I call the supremacy of it. Where Jesus turned around in John 15:15, he said, you are no longer my servants, but you are my friends. Woohoo! For a servant does not know his master's business, but I reveal to you everything that my Father's telling me. I love it when you watch that whole thing because in the Old Testament where you have Elijah and Elisha. And it says in 1 Kings 19 that Elijah runs after Elisha, but you catch him in 2 Kings 2, and they're walking together. He moved from a servant to a friend and walked with him. What an awesome truth. But as you move on in the New Testament, you find out that the opening has now come for everybody to walk with God. Not just walk before God, but walk with God. That's why it tells us in Galatians in chapter 5 and verse 25, it says, if we live by the Spirit or in the Spirit, and I'll go back there in a minute, it says we can keep in step with him. What on earth is he saying? He's saying, church, what Enoch had, what Abraham had, what the disciples had, the whole church can have, where you can walk with God. Not just before God, not just following God, you can walk with God. Boy, what an incredible revelation on a day of a wedding. See, when Jesus is talking to his disciples in John 14 and verse 16 and 17, he's making incredible statements to them. And he's saying, listen, guys, what I am to you, it's good that I'm going away because there's only just me in this physical body. But when I go away, I'll send another one, listen to the original language, just like myself. He is with you, but he will be in you. He's the one that's going to walk with you like I walk with you. Awesome truth. I'm offering you the same thing. That's why there's 2 scriptures that you need to get hold of. In 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 14, it makes this statement. And the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. The word fellowship means 2 fellas in a ship. Yes, it does. It means 2 people together in all of life's circumstances. It means that you walk in partnership. When we shook hands with those people today, they don't know what they did. Most people in America think you can flit in and flit out of everything. Moment you say, I'm in partnership, you mean I'm in fellowship and I am in covenant with you. And when we walk in fellowship with the Holy Spirit, he comes into covenant with us. We come into covenant with him. We partner together in the walk of God.